It's good to see everybody. Thank you for coming. Just a little housekeeping at the beginning, just to remind you that next week will be the final share of this series. There'll be a little break for the summer, and then, please God, we'll start again at the beginning of September in Elul for the run-up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, please God. So, a couple of other announcements. Please, could I ask you to turn off your phones right now? That will be very helpful to them to silent. And also to thank our sponsors. The whole academic year has been sponsored Le'ilu Nishmos Barnabas Brandit and Zelig Ben Kalman, Zichronam Livracha. We're very grateful for that sponsorship. So we are in the middle of a 3-part series. I promised you a little bit of a return to Shabbat focus, and we're looking at some new issues we haven't looked at before. So last week we looked at the issue of washing dishes by hand, and we reviewed also some of the halachot of asking a non-Jewish housekeeper or a cleaning help to come in and wash dishes and help mind the house generally, and we looked at some of those issues. And this was really a preamble to today's share, which is looking at the issue of timers on Shabbos. Time switches, which goes way beyond, of course, the issue of dishwashers, but I want to focus on dishwashers because that is a very relevant question, but also to look more generally at the main sugyot that deal with the timers on Shabbos. And this itself is a preamble to next week. Next week is a request shir. I am taking requests as well, which is, Amy has requested for a little while that we should have a shir on charging hearing aids on Shabbos. And of course that is broader than just the hearing aid question. It goes to the issue of charging other things and use of machinery. I was asked also to give a shir about asking Siri and Alexa to do things on Shabbos. That itself is a fascinating shir. I won't have time to do that as well next week, but I will try and put that into a future series. And then, as I promised you, I think we'll get in the fall to some more medical ethical issues as well. So let's have a look today. Hopefully you have the sheet. There's some really core, foundational, halachic material and very relevant contemporary issues coming up. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what has to rest on Shabbat? Now we say this when we say Kiddush. It's in the 10 Commandments. Have a look with me in number 1. V'yom ha'shvi'i Shabbat la'Hashem Elokecha. The 7th day has to be a day of rest for Hashem, and here's a list of people who can't work. Lo ta'aseh kol malacha. The following people can't do any malacha. Ata, you. Uvincha uvitecha, your son and your daughter, obviously below bar mitzvah, because bar mitzvah age they're independently obligated. And again, we're not talking about a baby, but a young child who has already reached the age of chinuch. You can't get them to break Shabbat for you. Avdacha, your servants. Amatcha, your women servants. If you have servants in the house, they have to rest for Shabbos as well. Uvehemtecha, your animals, you're not allowed to work animals on Shabbos doing things for you. V'gerecha asher b'sharecha, and a ger toshav, which we don't really have today, but a ger toshav, a non-Jew who's living in Eretz Yisrael, keeping the 7 Noachide laws, you may not ask them to do any malacha either, even though they're not Jewish. Okay. Notably absent from that list is your dishwasher. And not just your dishwasher, but any of your kalim. Do you have to cause your utensils, your machinery to rest on Shabbat? It wasn't included in that list. And that is a fascinating machloka between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, which we need to look at right now. It's in the Mishnah right at the beginning, in the first parak, middle of the first parak of Shabbos, of Mishnah Shabbos, look at number 2. Bet Shammai omrim, Bet Shammai say, Ein shorin dio usamamanim ukarshinim. You're not allowed to put in on Friday afternoon ink. Ink here was not liquid ink, but like plants, so going to be ink to soak them so that they can be prepared for ink making. Samamanim, herbs that need to be soaked on Erev Shabbos to be prepared for different things. Karshinim is animal fodder. They're usually translated as vetch. Some kind of animal fodder that needs to be processed. You can't put them in before Shabbos on Friday afternoon. Only if you know they're going to be finished by the time Shabbos comes in. That the process of preparing of tikkun kli for these things is going to be finished by the time Shabbos comes in. Okay? Beit Hillel matirin, and Beit Hillel says, no, stick them in just before Shabbos and let your pots and pans and heating equipment do its work all through Shabbos. What do you care? You put them in on Friday, it wasn't Shabbos yet, let them finish the job on Shabbos. Bet Shammai says, no, you can't do that. Everything malacha related has to be done before Shabbos comes in. The next Mishnah goes on. Number 2, still in second line. Bet Shammai omrim, ein notnin unin shel pishtan letoch hatanur. You may not put flax, which has to be heated and dried out, into your oven. Only so that it'll be steamed and dried, all the steam will come off it before Friday, before Shabbos comes in. Again, you have to finish before Shabbos. And you can't put wool into a dye pot. Only if the ink, the dye rather, would have fully absorbed before Shabbos. Bet Hillel matirin. And Bet Hillel say, it's fine, start it on Friday, let it work on Shabbos. Finally, Bet Shammai omrim ein porshim metzuda chaya v'oifas v'dargin. If you're going to set animal traps, fish nets, traps on Friday, you could only set them if you're going to catch all the stuff you need to catch before Shabbos comes in. You can't set a trap which is going to work for you on Shabbos. Bet Hillel matirin. Bet Hillel say fine. What is the root machloket here? It's called shvitat kelim. Bet Shammai say you're not allowed to have your equipment working for you on Shabbos either. Which, by the way, gave Bet Shammai a major challenge. How did they light Shabbos candles? There is no indication anywhere that Bet Shammai do not agree that you have to light Shabbos candles. Now, Bet Hillel is fine. You light them on Friday afternoon and they burn through Shabbos. Bet Shammai, you can't do that. And of course, you can't have Shabbos candles which finish burning before Shabbos comes in. That defeats the entire object. How could you have your platter on or your food left in the oven, even if it's fully cooked? How can you do that? Certainly, if it's not fully cooked, how can you do that? So the answer in the Gemara, which I didn't bring you, is Beit Shammai were mafkir all of their equipment before Shabbos. They made them hefka. So when you'd walk into Beit Shammai's Friday night dinner and you see the candles burning, Beit Shammai would say, well, they're not my candles. We've given them over to hefka. They don't belong to me. Which is very interesting. How did exactly that dynamic work? So, because you don't have to have your candles burning, you just have light in the room on Shabbos. So for owning Shabbos and Kavod Shabbos. So the Yotze, the mitzvah. So this raises all sorts of questions, which just historically I don't want to get into now. Obviously the Sadducees who didn't accept oral law at all would sit in the dark. Well, the Karaites later did. I'm not sure exactly about the Sadducees. But the whole Bet Shammai issue is a very interesting one. Let's leave that for now. But Bet Hillel says, fine, you can put them in before Shabbos. As long as you're not doing it on Shabbos, let it do itself. Sit straightforward. However, then we get a slightly more complicated Gemara. Number 3, Tana Rabbana. So the Gemara quotes a brisa. Potkim ma'im legina erev Shabbat im chashecha. You can open up your water channel on Friday afternoon before it gets dark. Umitmalet v'holechet kol hayom kula. Let it water the garden through Shabbos. Fine, you have your sprinklers on. Turn them on Friday. Let them sprinkle the Shabbos. Umanichin mugma. There's more examples. Manichin mugma tachas hakelim. You can put spices that would perfume different cloths underneath those cloths. Umitgamrim v'holchim kol hayom kula. And let them perfume through Shabbos. But now's the kicker. But you cannot put your wheat into your water mill only if it's finished grinding before Shabbos comes in. Why? We've just given 5 or 6 examples. As long as you do it on Friday, let it finish on Shabbos. All of a sudden we have a statement, you can do this and you can do this, but you can't put stuff into a water mill so that it grinds on Shabbos. Why ever not? Machlokas. I'm a Rabbah. So Rabbah says, it's nothing to do with resting on Shabbos. Of course, in terms of Bet Hillel, you could do it in theory before Shabbos, but here the problem is, mipnei shemashma'at kol, because it makes a terribly loud noise. And that's a separate problem. In terms of the Shvitat Kelim, no problem. But you don't want all that noise going on Shabbos. Just skip for a second to number 4, look at Rashi. Why does it have to finish grinding before Shabbos? Because it makes a terrible noise. The Afsha Milta b'Shabbos. Afsha Milta. It is a very noisy thing on Shabbos, which is prohibited. The Ika Ziluta. That's a magic word, Ziluta. It's cheapened Shabbos. It's a cheap thing to do on Shabbos. It's not Shabbosdik to have all that noise grinding in the background. Okay, your water channel, it's quiet. The water's going in. The dye pot is quietly bubbling in the corner. But this big water mill churning all through Shabbos, it's a problem. That's what Rabbah says. Go back to number 3, the third line. Amalei Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says to him, what's your problem? V'leimamar mishum shvisas kelim. Why wouldn't you have a bigger issue of shvisas kelim? No, the only problem reason why you can't put your stuff in is the same as we saw before. Shvitat kelim, your kelim have to rest. The Tanya, and he brings the derivation. You have to keep carefully everything I tell you. What's this everything? This added thing on Shabbat. L'rabot shvitat kelim. That includes shvitat kelim. Amar Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef then adds. Mishum shvisas kelim, the only reason you can't put your wheat into your grinder before Shabbos is because of shvitat kelim, your stuff has to rest. And man tana shvitat kelim doraisa, and who is the tana? Who is the opinion that holds the shvitat kelim is a problem? Beit Shammai v'lo Beit Hillel. So basically Rav Yosef says, no, this is the same as all the other ones. The only people who are going to have a problem with the grinding on Shabbos are Beit Shammai, the same people that said you can't light your candles and you can't start your water sprinkler. But Beit Hillel have no problem with it. What about the noise thing? Nah, Rabbi Yosef doesn't hold of that. Nah, so it's noisy. Lots of things are noisy. Let it be noisy. Since when can you not have something make a noise on Shabbos? One second, we'll see. We'll see who we paskin like in a minute. So you have a machlokas between Rav Yosef and Rabbah. Rabbah says that even Beit Hillel that allow you to start something on Friday, this is an exception. It's noisy, you can't have noisy machinery on Shabbos. Came along Rav Yosef and says, no, you can. I don't think it's a problem. The only issue in this Gemara is Shvisas Kalim, and we, Beit Hillel, don't hold by Shvisas Kalim. So let's see what we paskin. Number 5. The Rambam says, top of page 2, you're allowed to start any malacha on Erev Shabbos, Friday, even though it finishes automatically on Shabbos. We are only prohibited from doing malacha on the day itself, on Shabbos. If the malacha does itself, as it were, Shabbos through Shabbos, we can benefit from that. We can benefit from that. The fact that it works through Shabbos is not a problem as long as you started it on Erev Shabbos. That's the general principle. Of course, there are a few exceptions, and I listed 2 or 3 here. One of the most famous ones is you can't leave food which is not cooked on the blech, on the stove or whatever when Shabbos comes in. Why not? We hold that we're not worried about shvisas kelim. We pass it like Beis Hillel. So put your raw food in and let it cook on Shabbos like everything else. And the answer is no, that's an exception. The rabbis put a gezerah on that because we're worried if the food is not at least a third, a half cooked. I'm not getting into the whole sugya. You'll get a little bit mavulbal and itbalbel, and you'll think it's not cooking properly. You've got guests coming in half an hour, and you'll turn it up. It's a separate thing. In terms of shvisas kalim, yeah, fine, put it in on Friday, let it cook. No, we're worried that you might turn it up, which leads to all of the questions we'll see at the end of the shir. What if there's no knob? What if there's no setting that you can change? What if it's all a sealed unit? We'll see that. So that's one exception. Another exception which we'll see is you're not allowed, let's say they didn't like candles, they had a little flame, little Aladdin lamp, whatever, and you had a wick which was sparking and giving off, and you looked on Shabbos and it's giving off all sorts of sparks on Shabbos. Or even on Friday afternoon, you see it's beginning to spark. You can't put a bowl of water next to the flame so that the sparks will go out into the water. That's another one. So why not? Let me do that on Friday afternoon and let it extinguish through Shabbos. Now, we're worried that you might mess around with it. You might kind of put it a bit closer, move it a little bit, lift it up a little bit, and you'll have all these sparks going out on Shabbos. And then we see this watermill. According to Rabbah, that's also an exception. Rabbah says you're not allowed to have a mill working on Shabbos because of the noise. Rav Yosef said, we're not worried about the noise. So who do we paskin like? Are we worried about noise or are we not worried about noise? So it's interesting, there's a whole machlokas in the Rishonim. In the middle of page 2, just before Sul 6, I brought you on the question of Avshamilsa, the noise. Rabbeinu Tam, the Rambam, and the Rif all go with Rav Yosef. We're not worried about the noise. Whereas Rabbeinu Chananel, the Rosh, the Smag, and the Smak, and many others appear to go with the other answer. We are bothered about the noise. So how does that divide up? Is it a Sephardi Ashkenazi split? Is it something else? So have a look in number 6. This is the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see what we can work out from this. There's 2 very important Shulchan Aruchs today, and they're kind of parallel to each other. Number 6 says the Shulchan Aruch. First of all, of course, the opening statement is the Machaber, is Rav Yosef Karo for the Sfaradim. You can open up your water channel for the garden. V'heim nimshachim v'holchim b'chol Shabbos, and let them water through Shabbos. De'ein adam mitzvah al shvisas kalim. Nice and simple. We obviously paskin like Beit Hillel. We're not worried about your machinery working on Shabbos. And then he adds, as far as the mill's concerned, you're allowed to put stuff, wheat in the mill, shel mayim, rechaim shel mayim in the water mill, samach lachashecha, right before Shabbos. Just before Shabbos, just before you light candles for Shabbos, you open up your grain hopper, all the wheat goes in, and it's going to work for you all through Shabbos. You can do that, no problem. Obviously, pastors like Rav Yosef, not worried about noise. The Ramah adds in, explaining the Machaber in the Rashi scripts in the second line, because obviously according to this view, we're not worried lahashma'at kol about the noise. Now, why did we say the noise was a problem? So Rashi said ziluta. It's not Shabbosdik. The Ramah gives a different reason. Why might we be bothered about noise? This first opinion says we're not. Sheyomru, because people will say, people talk, right? Rechaim shel ploini toichnos b'Shabbos. Frumer down the road. Not as from as you think. He's working, his mill's working all through Shabbos, and people will cast aspersions. Maybe they'll think you put some wheat in on Shabbos. And that's obviously a concern. He says that's not a concern for this first opinion. And then he brings a second opinion. Now, V'yesh Oisrem, says the Ramah, but there are those who say no, like we saw in Rabbah. You can't do it Bereichaim with the mill. You can do it with the water, but not with the mill. And any time that you're going to get a noise, something very noisy, you can't do it. And he says, for Ashkenazim, that's how you should do lechatchila. Ideally, you should follow that opinion. Mihu b'makam pseida, but if it's a situation of loss, yesh lahakel kamotion isba'al, you can be lenient and rely on the other opinion and not worry about the noise. So we have a lot of questions to ask on that. We seem to have a Sephardi Ashkenazi split. The Bet Yosef, the Machaber says, not worrying about the noise. As long as you started on Friday, noise doesn't bother us. The Ashkenazim the Ramah says, L'chatchila, we are worrying about noise, but if there's a situation of loss, then we're not. Now, first of all, what is this loss business? All of a sudden, if you're going to lose money, you can just cut through halacha. That's not how halacha works. If you have a storehouse with millions of dollars worth of produce on Shabbos in the middle of a non-built-up area and there's a fire and it's burning to the ground, obviously not where there's any danger to life, but it's just you're going to lose all your money, you can't put the fire out. You could maybe call the fire departments and things like that, but you can't. You're going to lose a fortune. So all of a sudden here in loss, you can change the halacha, you can break the halacha. So Rav Hershel Shechter often quotes the Ramah himself. The Ramah in his Torah Chatat, he has an introduction and he explains, when I say, says the Ramah, that this is prohibited ideally, but in a situation of loss, you can do it. It's not that you can break halacha if you're going to lose money. He says, I really paskin like the lenient opinion, that you can do it all the time. But in deference to the authorities that are strict, I recommend a chumrah that you should not do it ideally. But of course, if you're going to lose financially, it's not the right time to start keeping chumras. Because there has to be, only upside for a chumrah. If there's downside for a chumrah, I'm going to lose my livelihood, why would you be keeping a chumrah? So always remember when the Ramah, and others, but specifically the Ramah says, in a situation of loss you can do it, he's not allowing you to get away with anything. He really holds that you can do it anyway. He just recommends stringency in normal situations, and in a case of loss, okay, you can rely on the main opinion. Yes?
What if a candle, if you lit candles Friday night, falls onto the table?
Okay, good. I'm not getting into all of these situations. What can you do? You can maybe put something wet around it and stop it from, it might burn your table, but you can stop it, burning anything else. We live in a situation also now where we live in built-up areas, and if there, God forbid, is a fire that really catches fire, there's a real danger to life. Now, I'm not saying that if a candle falls over, that's immediately pikuach nefesh. I remember once I was at a Shabbaton and a candle fell over and set fire to a napkin. Okay. So the Rav, who was making, during Kiddush actually, there was a candle over there, the Rav took the napkin, just threw it on the floor, and the fire went out. Okay, I'm not saying every situation you can do that, but that's how you would basically react. So that's one question. But what's considered to be noisy? A watermill is very noisy. I brought you the decibels down here, around 90 decibels. Okay. Now, I don't know if you know how decibels work, but it's a geometric, not an arithmetic scale. So 60 decibels is 10 times louder than 50, and 70 is 10 times louder than 60, and 80 is 10 times louder than 70. So the average watermill is 90 decibels. So how noisy is a dishwasher? Let's get back to it. Is our dishwasher a noisy problem? Are people going to hear the noise and think, oh, look, he's put the dishwasher on? So you don't hear it. So I brought here, the dishwasher ranges between 38 and 53 decibels. Obviously, the more money you pay, the the quieter dishwasher you get. By comparison, normal human whispering is 40 decibels. So there are dishwashers which are quieter than a human whisper. By comparison, normal conversation is 60, a normal TV sound is 65, a wake-up alarm is 80, a lawnmower is 90, a live concert is 115, and you start going a bit higher than that, and you end up with deafness and who knows what. And then you need next week's share to know if you can charge your hearing aids on Shabbos, because you went to too many concerts. So the question is a dishwasher noisy? It's certainly not as noisy as a watermill. No question about that. But is it still too noisy? Also, what is a loss? If I don't run my dishwasher on Shabbos, there's no real loss there. It's not. Maybe if you have a big, like a summer camp when there are thousands and thousands of people, or a hospital, or an army base, and what they do is they have dishwashers, and they have non-Jews running them on Shabbos usually. So what would be considered to be a loss? And what about, the Ramah's worried that people are going to say that you turned it on if they hear the noise. Well, what about things that people don't turn on, that everybody knows that nobody turns on? For give you an example, you have a noisy fridge that every now and then comes on and makes a noise. Nobody thinks that people plug in their fridge on Shabbos. That's a noise that everybody knows happens automatically, and you didn't do it. So there's going to be no concern. The Ramah's not going to say people are going to think you put your fridge on Shabbos. An electricity generator, there's almost nothing louder than an electricity generator, and half of Bnei Brak, probably 90% of Bnei Brak, runs their Shabbos electricity from a generator. Why is that not a problem of hashmat kol? Well, you can't imagine anything more noisier. So the Chazon Ish, and we're not going to get into the whole sugya of why they don't use the grid on Shabbos. So we gave a whole share on that, and I referenced it in the footnotes. Just in parentheses, one of my moments of parental nachas, which is when I was walking down the street with my son when he was smaller, probably a teenager, and we looked at some solar panels on the roof. And my son Asher said, why do they have all those 25 solar panels on the roof? So he says, well, they generate electricity, and whatever they don't use, they sell back to the grid. So he looked at me confused. He says, what's that got to do with Rav Soloveitchik? The Rav Soloveitchik is the grid. Gon Rav Yosef Dov. So I said, oh, what a moment of parental nachas when the grid is Rav Soloveitchik. Okay, so it's very funny. So the electricity? The Chazon Ish said, no, our electricity generators, that noise is screaming Shabbos, because it's the way that we're keeping. Again, because nobody thinks you turned on a generator manually. So too sprinklers, even if sprinklers are noisy, and I'm not sure they are. Everybody knows these days people have their sprinklers on either all the time or on timers. The air conditioning units, very, very noisy. No, people don't. Everyone knows they have them set. A ringing phone. Well, by definition, if the phone is ringing, somebody else is doing a malacha, not you. So nobody's worried about the fax machine. Remember those? Answering machines, when people want to leave messages on your answering machine. Yeah, everyone knows you're not setting that. You're not doing that manually. What about an alarm clock? An alarm clock goes off. Very noisy, an alarm clock. It's meant to be noisy. Are people going to be worried that you did that on Shabbos? Well, if you remember the old days, alarm clocks used to have to turn them on the night before. So most people would have to turn their alarm clock on Friday night, so maybe it is a problem. Okay, maybe today it's not a problem because everything's electronic and everything's set for days and weeks in advance. What if it goes off? You might turn it back. That's another issue. You may turn it off. That's not this issue. Are you going to make a gezerah in case you turn it off? What about musical alarms, where suddenly your radio starts playing, or your phone starts with a musical jingle? Do people think, oh, they've turned the music on? I don't know. It's interesting. Or does everybody know now? No, everybody's alarms are on. Music goes on. Music turns off. Nobody's setting anything on Shabbos. There are going to be a few grey areas, but basically that is permitted. So go over to page 3. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with an interesting machlokas, that noisy equipment that people might think you turned on, and a dishwasher is something you turn on Shabbos, even though it might not be noisy. A washing machine is certainly something that you turn on manually. Nobody has their washing machines on a timer that they're going to turn on at a certain time. That for the Ashkenazim is a problem on Shabbos. If there's a case of loss, It's not a problem. Interestingly, in the washing machine case, what will be a case of loss? Let's say you have a chayal who comes home on Friday night, Friday afternoon, before Shabbos, and they need to leave on Motzei Shabbos, and they need clean, dry uniforms. So maybe you could stick in the uniform on Friday before Shabbos to wash through Shabbos, and okay, it's making a big noise. Peseda, but this is a Makom Peseda. The kid's in the army and he needs the clothes. He's doing a mitzvah. How you dry them, I'm not getting into all of that now. Yes?
But what if you have a washing machine like in the basement, like in America?
Good. So that's an interesting shaila. So I heard Rav Asaf Bednash, who give a shir on this. I listened to it, and he normally the Rav Moshe Feinstein says noise means anything someone could hear in a different room. Okay, he said Rav Bednash says he quotes that he heard from people, although he never saw it written down, that if it makes a noise but nobody can hear it, then that's not called a noise. A bit like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, like you did it. So if you have something, exactly your question, it's in a basement, nobody's, it could be heard, but nobody's down there. Or it runs at 3 a.m. in the morning. And yes, someone might hear it if they were in the lounge at 3 a.m. in the morning, but no one's in the lounge at 3 a.m. in the morning. So I've not seen it in writing, but it might make sense, especially if the Ramah's concern is people might say, they've just turned on them. Well, if there are no people that would hear it. On the other hand, with rabbinic mitzvahs, you don't start playing around with that normally. Well, it's okay here, but not there, and there, but not here. Usually we say lo plug, that we're not going to start. So I'm not clear on that, but it's an interesting question. Yes?
The dishwasher goes on Shabbat. Only the people in the house will hear it.
Okay, good.
Strangers
So that's
don't
another.
hear it.
Right, you never have guests for Shabbos?
But you don't have the dishwasher on when the guests.
Okay, so they're already, you're saying you don't do that. Okay, but other people, someone might come round to hear. Fine. So let's see. There's another reason why the dishwasher is more of a problem. We'll get to it. Turn over to page 3, please. So let's talk about timers. So most poskim allow you to start something on Friday and let it work on Shabbos. We saw the Beit Hillel, other than a few exceptions like the noisy machinery or the food that you might turn up and down, or up really is the question, you're allowed to start things before Shabbos. So fine, I put my stuff on a timer, and it happens on Shabbos. I set it all up on Friday. What could be the problem? And Taka, most people say that that's true. It's not a problem if you put stuff on a timer. But there are some that say, no, timers are not the same thing. For maybe 3 reasons. Number one, all of the cases that we saw before, the dye and the flax and the watering channel, you started it on Friday and it ran consistently from Friday into Shabbos. A timer doesn't work that way. A timer starts in the middle of Shabbos. Okay, you set it up on Friday, but the thing itself, whatever's working, only started on Shabbos. Maybe that's different. Or maybe the problem with the reason these other things are okay is that you can't adjust them. You set them going, and now they're running, and there's nothing you can do. With a timer, maybe we're worried that you might adjust it, like the flame. Remember, the flame was a case, if you have the well of water, you might nudge it and bring it forward. Maybe the timer is a problem for this. And other people argue that the reason that you can start something on Friday and run it into Shabbos is because you don't get any direct benefit from that on Shabbos. My wheat is going to be ground and I'll deal with it on Monday. My flax is going to be soaked and I'll deal with it later. But you're not using it on Shabbos. But who says you can set something up on Friday that you actually use on Shabbos itself? For example, you can't give money to a non-Jewish friend or a housekeeper or something and say, you know something, give them the money on Friday and say, Shabbos morning, go down to the market, the Saturday market, and pick up some nice warm, kosher buns and we'll have them for Shabbos breakfast. You can't do that. In fact, the Sefer Hasidim says that a Jew shouldn't even live in a town where there's a nearby Saturday market, non-Jewish market, because it'll be too tempting to get people to run down to the market, pick up a bit of this, pick up a bit of that, because you can't have it. That's being done for you. Okay, you're not doing it, you set it up beforehand, but you're benefiting on Shabbos. So with a timer, you're benefiting on Shabbos.
Yeah, but in those cases, there's an explicit research to not have someone else for alcohol and lust, and have other people are not allowed to do things for you. But here we're still dealing
I understand, but what if it's a non-Jew that you didn't ask them directly and you set it up in such a way? So the question, you're right, it's quite different, and that's why most poskim don't have a problem with this, but there are some who do. Specifically, and I promised you last week I'd read this with you this week, Rav Moshe Feinstein. I want you to see his reasoning here. Number 7. Hine lefi ani asdaiti. Pashut she'asur lahatir zeh. You're not allowed to put things on a timer on Friday and let them do something on Shabbos. Because through this timer kazeh, yicholim la'asot kol malachot b'Shabbat. You could work out to do everything on Shabbos. Ubechol bate charoshet, brackets factories. All the factories could be working on Shabbos through timers. Ve'ein chazilzul gadol l'Shabbos mizeh. There's no greater zilzul. He's focusing on the not Shabbos day. Basically, Shabbos has turned into a weekday. Ubarur, it's clear to me. She'im hayazeh bizman atanaim va'amorayim. If the rabbis, if Chazal had known about timers, they would for sure have said this was not allowed. Like they prohibited asking a non-Jew, mitamzeh for the same reason. V'gam ulai, and not only do I think they would have done, because maybe they wouldn't have done. He says maybe they already did prohibitive timers. V'gam ulai hu mimeli bichlal isuzeh. Maybe the timers are already prohibited because of the existing rabbinic prohibition of asking a non-Jew. Da'asru amiru la'akum. You're not allowed to ask a non-Jew. Da'asru kol malacha nasid b'shvil Yisrael. What is that prohibition? Any malacha done for a Jew, mitzad amirat Yisrael, because the Jew asked for it on Friday to be done. V'kol shekain mitzad masa Yisrael. All the more so if the Jew did it. Meaning, what's worse? Speaking on Friday and having stuff done for you on Shabbos, which is prohibited, or doing something on Friday and enabling it to be done for you on Shabbos. He said the doing is worse than the speaking. Asiya is always more serious than the Amira. So if already asking a non-Jew is prohibited, if he does it for you on Shabbos, then setting the time switch must be prohibited, surely. Aval af im neima, and even if you tell me that we can't make up new prohibitions. They didn't say it, they didn't have it, it's not there. You can't learn out from things 2,000 years ago, just because you don't like it. Because they didn't answer it. Even though the reason they didn't prohibit it is because they just didn't know about it. If you're going to tell me that's not a reason to make something prohibited, mamash, mikol makam, and he makes a statement at the end, I still don't like you to use time switches, because even if it's not prohibited, it should be prohibited.
Did he really disallow it?
Yes, he allowed it for lights, because he said already lights, people are used to, what can I do? I'm not going to stop it, no one's going to... But he did not allow it for air conditioning, for heating, for all platters, for all sorts of... This is a chumrah of Rav Moshe Feinstein that most people do not follow. People are often, like I said last week, keen to quote Rav Moshe. Oh, I rely on Rav Moshe, I rely on Rav Moshe. So Rav Moshe Feinstein has a number of real, humdingers of a chumrah. Another one he has is you can't listen to the radio any day of the year. Any music, not speech, any music. You can't play music any day of the year, except at a simcha, because of Zeichel Churban. You're listening to jazz in the middle of November, and you don't remember the Churban, you're listening to jazz. He says you can't listen to any music at all. Now, again, nobody paskins like that today. Maybe they did 50 years ago. So Rav Moshe doesn't like time switches, even on Shabbos, even on Friday rather, if you set them on Friday, but the world generally speaking does not hold like that. Okay, let's go into the dishwasher issue. So what about setting your dishwasher on a timer? I set up my dishwasher, it's on a timer, it's going on at 3 a.m. I'm going to stack it on Friday night, it's going to turn on at 3 a.m. And on Shabbos morning I'm going to have nice clean dishes. So what melachot happen in a dishwasher? Which of the 39 melachas do you break by running a dishwasher? Okay, we'll get to the door in a minute. Shutting a door is not a malacha. We'll find that shutting the door might be the thing that enables it to work. We'll get there. But what are the malachas? So the first one is bishul. A dishwasher heats up water. Dishwashers, most brands of dishwasher do not use hot water from the heating system in the house. They take cold water and they heat it up. So heating water for sure is bishul on Shabbos. It doesn't matter if you're not drinking it. That's very clear in the Gemara. Heating stuff which you're not drinking, you're heating for other reasons, not eating is still prohibited as bishul. That's number one. Havara, lighting the flame, whatever the heating element in the dishwasher that comes on, that is also a prohibited malacha d'oraisa of lighting a flame. And if you are a chazonish person who holds that all electricity on Shabbat is the malacha of boner, of connecting a circuit, then you've got a million more things that go wrong with the dishwasher every time the circuits connect. Now, most people don't follow that position of the Chazon Ish. Most people rely on Rosh Shlomo Zalman and others that electricity in essence is a rabbinic prohibition if you connect it on Shabbos, and even what that prohibition is not 100% clear, but for sure, even if you leave that aside, there's turning on the heating element and there's cooking the water. There's also a kind of side issue. What about the detergent? Is there a bishul problem on cooking the detergent? Okay, it's not food, but bishul doesn't have to be food. Bishul is prohibited even with non-edibles. What about the raw leftovers sitting on your plates? Are we worried about that? Little bits of salad that are stuck to your plates, and now red hot water cooks them on Shabbos. Is that bishul? You're going to tell me, no, that's not bishul. Bishul is not when I'm cooking it to throw it away in the garbage. Or are you going to say, well, no, at the end of the day, it's cooking, it's cooking, it's cooking. I mean, the stuff is cooking, it's going to happen. You don't want it to happen, it's going to happen. So let's have a look and see what the issues are. So now we need to get into our second major sugya of today. Today's a lot of real juicy stuff. So let's try and do this relatively quickly. There's something on Shabbos which is called groma. Groma is where I don't actually do it directly, but I cause it to happen. Let's have a look at number 8. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas Omer, Porsin or shel gedi al gabi shida tevel migdal she'achaz behem et ha'or. Let's say your furniture catches fire. Something drops on the furniture. Your furniture is smoldering, catching fire. You can put a goat skin on the other side, which is not yet on fire, because when the fire reaches the skin, skins are not flammable. The skin will just singe, and the fire will go out. So you can throw that goat skin on the cupboard, on the closet, so that the fire won't destroy the closet. Obviously, if you're in a built-up area and there's a risk that the fire might, God forbid, catch and cause damage to life, etc., that's not the case here. The case is where there's only your money involved. For that you can do. You can't put the fire out, but you can put a skin on top to break it. And you can take jugs, bags of water, Bein Meleim, Bein Rekani, whether they're full of water, whether they're empty, Bishvil Shalot Tavad Adleika, so that you'll make a fire break, so the fire won't spread. Meaning, what's going to happen? The fire is going to spread. Let's say it's in your field and it's destroying your field. You run out with bags of water and place big, garbage bags of water 20 feet away or 10 feet away from the fire. And if the fire spreads, which it could spread in that direction, it'll hit the bags will burst, the water will go out, and the water will come out, and the fire will go out. That you can do. Rabbi Yossi says no, he doesn't like full of water, but we paskin like the first opinion, you can do that. Why is that okay? Why can you take water and put it not on the fire, but near the fire in a way that the fire is going to break the bags or break the jugs, and then the water is going to come out? That's called groma. We'll see that is called groma, and that is mutter on Shabbos in certain situations. We once had an ant infestation on Shabbos, and it was in England. We must have had one hot day once, like in England, and the ants were really kind of marching through the kitchen. And Sarah ran to the Rav down the road, and she says, "Can I use ant powder?" He says, "Well, you can't put it on the ants because that's killing the ants on Shabbos, but you can make like a line of powder, so when the ants march, into this ant powder, they'll all commit mass ant suicide, and that's groma. That you can do, in Kacha, that's what we did. So." Why exactly this is mutter, we're going to see right now. Go over to page 4, please. The Gemara explains, I'm a Rav Yehuda, I'm a Rav. Rav comes in with another case. Not the case of the singed wardrobe, or the case of the crops on fire and the bags of water. He says as follows. Number 9. Talit she'achaz ha'ur mitzad echad. Let's say a cloak has caught fire on one side. What can you do? Noisin alei amayim. You can put water, probably dirty water, because so it's not cleansing the cloak. Mitzad acher, on the other side, not on the fire, on the other side. Ve'im kavta, and if the fire goes out, kavta, let it go out. That's fine. Why? Ksiv lo ta'aseh kol malacha, because it says you may not do malacha. Asiyahu da'aser, doing malacha is also, but groma is shari. That's permitted. Okay, groma is permitted. Doing malacha is prohibited. Something's talking. Okay, great. Thank you. So, good. You can put water on the cloth, and the fire will reach the water, and the water will go out. The fire will go out, excuse me. However, and here's the case that all of a sudden is not allowed. Number 10. Says the Mishnah, you can put a little jug under the flame that's sparking to catch the flames, but you can't put water in the jug, in the bowl. Because that's extinguishing. Why is that extinguishing? Why is that not grama? Why is that not grama? What's that?
Why can't the timer be considered?
Oh, good, we'll get there. Maybe the timer is considered grama. But here, I can't take a bowl of water and put it near the candles. Because if the candles spark, or when they spark, the spark will go in the water and the water will go out. Apparently I can't do that. Why not? The Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi, Afilu Tema Rabbanon. Even if you quote me the opinion of the rabbis to say groma is okay, Shani Hacha, this is different, this is worse, because you are actively advancing, accelerating this process of extinguishing. So there's obviously a fine difference between these two cases, which we have to identify. Again, if you have a fire in the field, putting the jugs of water 20 feet away, and then the fire goes to the jugs, breaks the jugs, water comes out, fire goes out, mutter. Okay. Having a sparking flame, which could catch something on fire, and sticking a bowl of water underneath it, you're not pouring water on it, putting a bowl of water underneath it, and the sparks will come, not okay. They seem very similar. They seem very, very similar. One is okay, and one is not okay, and I brought you in the footnote, a list of Rishonim and how they explain these things in different ways. For example, some just explain that the second case of Rav Ashi's case of the candle which is sparking just simply overrides, it disagrees with, and overrules the earlier case, meaning it's just prohibited. Even the case with the flames on the cloth. But most people don't say that. Some people say, well, the cloth is a suffix. Maybe it will put the fire out. Maybe it'll go a different direction. Or the jugs of water. Who knows if the fire will actually go in that way? Maybe it won't go. But where the spark situation, it's right there. It's definite. It's going to happen. Everyone's trying to work out a different way to distinguish those two cases. How does the Shulchan Aruch rule? Have a look at number 13. So everybody rules that the bowl of water is prohibited. But in terms of the fire in the field, we'll see what happens. Look at number 13. Says the Shulchan Aruch. Teva she'achas bo ha'or. A cupboard, the closet that catches fire. You can put the goat skin on one side. Shelot tisaref. Okay, shelot tisaref, so it won't burn. And you can put a mechitza, a wall of these jugs, of any kalim, even earthenware jugs, chadashim, which are going to break. Malay maim, even if they're full of water, shevada yitbaku, even if you know for sure that they're going to break and the water's going to come out, when the fire reaches them. Why is this all okay? Degram kibui mutter, because groma is allowed on Shabbos, and in comes the Ramah again and says, b'makom pseida, when there's going to be a loss. There has to be some kind of significant loss. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It has to be some kind of significant loss. So what's going on here? Effectively, in Groma, we're paskening that on Shabbos, you have two opinions. The Mechaber says, Groma's fine, you can just do it. And the Ramah is saying, only if it's a situation of loss. And by the way, it's interesting, here the Sfardim really all go with the Ramah. Rav Ovadia Yosef, it says, we go with the Ramah on this, and we allow Groma only if there's a case of loss. Like a mitzvah that is not going to happen if you don't do this groma. So what would be a modern case of groma? So you're asking about these cases of groma, the timers. So let's assume that adjusting a timer on Shabbos is groma. I'm not talking about now setting it before Shabbos, but adjusting it. Let's say I have a timer which is set for things to go on at, I want my time to go on at 10 a.m. And by mistake, I notice that it's been set wrong and it's only going on at 3 p.m. And I need my lunch to be hot, and all my guests are coming, and this is our only hot food. Can I fiddle with the timer, not turning anything on now, and just accelerate it and put this new situation in place that I can, and now it's going to go on at 10 a.m. Yes or no? If that is groma, which we're going to see in a minute, then that should be allowed in a situation of need. What would be a situation of need? So it could be, I've made a few suggestions. Let's say the lights, the house is completely dark. And no one can see anything, and everyone's falling all over the place, and the lights are not going on for 15 hours. You could maybe move it forward, moving the timer forward. If that's grama, it's now the lights are going to go on half an hour. Maybe that's a situation of loss. We'll second. Don't make any suggestions yet. We're going to go through a lot more before we get there. What about maybe a situation? Let's say your food, as I say, you don't have any hot food. You're not going to have any hot food on Shabbos. Maybe that will be a case where you could bring it forward. But we're going to look in more details at that. We once had a situation where we had a guest who was freezing in our apartment. There's some girl, and she was literally shivering and turning blue. Okay. And it was very cold in the apartment, and our heating was not going on for another 3 hours. So the question is, can you bring forward the timer a little bit? Not turn the heating on, but bring forward the timer so the heating is going to go on in 15 minutes so that this girl's not going to freeze on Shabbos. Or is that not allowed? Do we say that a timer is groma or not? If adjusting a timer on Shabbos is groma, then it should be permitted b'makam hefsed. It should be permitted if there's a real need. Okay, so let's have a look at that right now. So go to page 5 and let's answer this question, and then you can ask your questions. We'll just hold off a second because I don't want us to get bogged down in questions. I would just point out that on Yom Tov the situation is different. Groma is for sure permitted on Yom Tov, according to all opinions, for any need. And therefore, on those cases that I've given, are you allowed to bring the timer forward? If the timer is groma, we'll see right now, then for sure that will be permitted on Yom Tov. But Shabbos is different. Shabbos is only permitted in a situation of real loss. So let's have a look at the case. How does this work for Shabbos timers? So most poskim, we're going to see soon, feel that a timer is groma. Why? Why would a timer be groma? So it depends on how you see groma. Why is this case of the field with the jugs okay? Is it okay because of the time delay? If it's the time delay, I do something now, and in 15 minutes, something happens. If that is the reason that it's groma, and therefore allowed in certain situations, then timer should be fine. Because whatever I'm doing, there's always a time delay by definition. Okay, you have to be careful if you're really close up to where the click's going to go down, that a little nudge of the timer. I know people may have had this experience, and oy vey, I just turned all the lights on. So you don't want to play with fire, literally. But if it's going to be 15, 20, half an hour, why not, if that's the issue? Or is the issue that there's some real causation which is lacking here? Meaning I'm putting jugs of water here. The fire itself has to, quote unquote, decide to spread all the way across the field and then heat the jugs and then break the jugs and then pour on the water. There's a million reasons why that might not happen. And even if it's definitely going to happen, there's an entire independent force which is not yet there, which has to be there for this malacha to even happen. The fire has to heat the jugs has to break, the water has to pour. Whereas the timer, it's all set. It's there. The clock is already turning. When you turn the timer, everything that needs to happen in order for this to go on in half an hour is already in process. And we'll see that there are two radically different ways of looking at timers. Rav Soloveitchik is machmir. He says the only reason that the groma is permitted in the field is because there is an independent causation that has to come in that's not already there when you did the groma, i.e. the fire spreading, heating, breaking. But the timer, he said, no, everything that needs to happen to make it happen is already happening when you fiddle with the timer. And therefore, that's not groma. That's called turning on the lights. You turn on the lights in 15 minutes. Imagine when the light switch, you have light switches that when you press them, the light turns on 5 minutes from now. That's going to be mutter because of groma. You turn on the lights, 5 minutes, the light goes on. It's all set up already. Whereas Rav Ovadia Yosef says, no. The only issue that's relevant is timing. Whatever you do on Shabbos, if there's a significant time gap between when you do it and when it happens, that's groma. So you see already that Rav Ovadia is going to be much more lenient with time switches than Rav Soloveitchik is going to be. So let's have a look and see how we pass, and then we'll get to the dishwasher and we'll have an answer to our question. Rav Moshe, here's another chumrah of Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe held that time switches is called action. He said it's not groma. Adjusting a time switch on Shabbos is the same as you doing the thing. He didn't see any distinction between them. And he says the time switch is muksa. So why did you think you could even play with the time switch in the first place? It's muksa. Now, why would a time switch be muksa? So what kind of muksa is it? So if it's muksa, the most obvious suggestion is it's muksa because it turns lights on. Yeah, but maybe it only turns lights on through groma, And therefore it doesn't turn lights on. It's not that's not a switch, it's something else. Or it's muksa because it's very valuable. No, it's not very valuable. People leave their time switches lying around, people lose them, people drop them on the floor, people don't care. But Rav Moshe said it was muksa, and I'll leave you to read number 14 in your own time. And you can read there, he says basically, as far as I'm concerned, any playing with any time switch on Shabbos is prohibited. Of course, we're not talking about life-threatening situations, obviously. In life-threatening situations, you do it directly, not on a timer. Although you'd minimize whatever you could. In a regular situation, you can't bring it forward. You can't bring it backwards. You can't play with the switch. It's muksa. So Rav Moshe was very, very anti any kind of playing with time switches on Shabbos. However, that is not how most poskim rule. You'll see, if you look at Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he does not rule this way. And certainly Rav Ovadia does not rule this way. And then we need to answer 4 different scenarios. I'll try to be as clear as I can and maybe leave some room for questions before we conclude on the dishwasher. So go to page 6. I've basically brought it for you how the Shmir Shabbos does. Let's deal with 4 cases. Case number 1, accelerating something, turning on. Accelerating something, turning on. Let's talk about lights. So my lights are scheduled to go on at midday. But I want them to come on earlier at 10 a.m. So I want to fiddle with a little, let's assume we have a time switch with a little clock and little pins that you go, almost all the time switches work this way now. The pins are set so it's going on at noon, and I want to just fiddle with it's 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm just about to go to shul, I want to fiddle with a couple of pins so that it comes on at 10. Now for sure Rav Moshe would say there's nothing to talk about, you can't do that. However, it depends on how you see a grammar. Rav Ovadia Yosef will say, that's mutter. In a case of a situation where you need it, it's mutter. Like for the Ramah, like we pass around the Ramah, the Makam Hefsed, as the dark house is going to be dark, then you'll have to see what's considered need. Maybe we can eat lunch in a bit darker. Maybe it's not as nice, but maybe it doesn't really matter. Onik Shabbos does count, but where do you draw the line of Onik Shabbos? Meaning, I like to have guests in my house on Shabbos lunchtime with the lights on because it looks nicer. But with the lights off, it's fine. It's just a bit dingy. So is that called Makam Pseda? I don't know. Maybe I'm just being mafunak that I like it with the lights on. I'm not sure that's enough. I don't have any hot food. That's already a major issue. This is my only food and my time is switched on. So according to Rav Ovadia Yosef, if there is a situation of accelerating, you will be allowed to do it. You'll be allowed to do that because it's a situation of grama and you're bringing it forward. As long as there's a real situation of need, you'll be allowed to do that. Rav Soloveitchik says no. Rav Soloveitchik says no. But many poskim say yes, and therefore you have to think, what would be, I think, if you follow this psak, in the case of the girl who was shivering and freezing and turning blue, I think it will be mutter, according to this, to accelerate, to play with the switch, to bring it forward an hour or two, so that the heating goes on. You're not happy.
No, because can you ask someone who's not Jewish?
Okay, that's a different question. To ask a non-Jew grandma is for sure okay. I'm talking about where there's no non-Jews around. Yes. He paskin like this. So the Shmur Shabbos Kilchasa says to bring it forward is mutter only in a situation of need.
But everybody's need is different.
Okay, so it is very subjective. Pseudo may be subjective. And he doesn't say great need. He says pseudo, there's a real loss. A loss of a mitzvah usually is fairly objective. Other things may be more subjective, and you have to be careful what you say is a need, especially since Rav Moshe Feinstein will say absolutely prohibited. That's like turning on the lights. And Rav Soloveitchik would say, prohibited, you can't do that. So that's scenario number 1. An easier scenario number 2 is delaying an activation. Let's say the lights are going on at 10 a.m. and I say, no, I don't need any lights at 10 a.m. Actually, I need to delay them so they won't come on till 2 p.m. Okay? Now I'm not accelerating anything. I'm just extending the status quo. It's dark now. It'll be dark for longer. I'm not accelerating anything. All I'm doing is something that was anyway going to happen is still going to happen. It's just going to happen later than it was previously going to happen. That's much less problematic. And many poskim will permit this, and maybe Rav Soloveitchik would also permit this, because all I'm doing is extending the status quo. Now, they talk about there was an old kind of time switch. I just about remember these, where instead of the little pins that go up and down, there were holes. Remember those? And there was like a pin you could take out and put back in again. Do they still exist? I've not seen them for years. With those already, Rosh Shlomo Zalman says that you can't do, because if you think about it, you've got it's due to go on at lights are going on at 12, and I'm delaying it. When I take the pin out, the lights are off right now, right? I take the pin out to put it in a different hole. The lights are now going to stay off because the whole thing's deactivated. No problem. But now I put the pin in at 2 p.m. I've now, lechatchila, caused the lights to go on at 2 p.m. They were not going to go on at 2 p.m. because the pin was taken out. Unless you had 2 pins. Yes, clever people have 2 pins. But the point is that that is not the way that we, these are not the time switches that we have today, so maybe that's not a problem. Accelerated deactivation and delayed deactivation are very similar. The only difference is that when turning the lights off is probably a drabonon rather than a doraisa, and therefore that may give a little bit more grounds for leniency. Therefore, even though you might be reluctant to accelerate turning the lights on, accelerating turning the lights off might be more of an accepted thing to do in certain situations. Again, Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Moshe will still say it's prohibited, but I've given you the reasons there. So where does that leave us with the dishwasher? Where does that leave us with the dishwasher? So most Ashkenazi poskim say that you may not run a dishwasher on Shabbos if it's a noisy dishwasher. Okay? Because most people turn a dishwasher on, they don't have it on a time switch, not normal to have it on a time switch. And someone might hear the noise and it's turned on. However, if you have a quiet dishwasher, that's not relevant. Okay? Silent dishwasher. So leave that aside. Again, so Ashkenazi poskim are concerned for the psak that someone might hear it. Sephardi poskim are not concerned for that either. So do the Sephardim have an issue, or even Ashkenazim with a quiet dishwasher? And this is where you said before, the problem is the door. What's the problem with the door? That almost all dishwashers have an override switch, which is that when you open the door, the dishwasher doesn't work. It turns off immediately. In order to prevent people opening the door in the middle of a cycle and red hot water, squirting out all around the kitchen. Can you imagine a little kid opens the door of the dishwasher and the dishwasher on a weekday? So the closing the door is like setting the time switch. That's the key. And therefore, if I open the door of the dishwasher and stack the dishwasher, and the dishwasher is set for 3 a.m. in the morning, so now my dishwasher is not going to work. If I leave the door open, the dishwasher is never going to turn on, even though the time switch is set because the door's open. Shutting the door is like adjusting the time switch. It's like bringing it forward. Now it's going to happen, and it was not going to happen otherwise, because that's the way the door works. It works as a groma. According to Rav Moshe, completely prohibited. According to Rav Soloveitchik, completely prohibited. According to Rav Ovadia Yosef, if it's a situation of need, then you can talk about groma, maybe that would be okay, and then you're going to have to define, do I really need to have a dishwasher to wash my dishes, or can I just do my wash the dishes by hand? There's no downside really in having your husband, has to be your husband, mind you, wash the dishes, okay? And that's not a downside. So most poskim will say, and there are a number of articles in Tchumim, I refer to the articles, that you cannot use a dishwasher on a timer because of the groma angle. What if you're clever and you disable the override? Okay, so most poskim will say that if you disable the override, there is no groma now. The dishwasher will work even if the door's open. So opening the door, closing the door, it's like setting a timer from before Shabbos, and you can do that. There are some poskim that say, yeah, but you've now introduced into your house a dangerous machine that will squirt boiling water at your children if they open the door when it's activated. Who says you're allowed to have a dangerous thing in your house? That is another halachic concern. So there are poskim will say, yeah, you solved the Shabbos problems, but you created a bunch of new problems. Okay?
Kids aren't up at 3 in the morning.
Okay, good. But if you might forget to not, fine. There's one more problem, guys. There's one more problem that I just need to mention and we'll finish, which I only mentioned obliquely, but which is, according to many poskim, still a problem. Even if you override the switch. Even if you said, well, groma's okay in a case of need, and for whatever reason I need, there's still another problem, which is shehiyah. What's shehiyah? So we said already, you're not allowed to leave uncooked food on a timer to cook on Shabbos. Why? Because we're worried that when it starts to cook, you might twiddle with the knob, you might turn it up, etc. You cannot have uncooked food which is going to cook through some kind of mechanism on Shabbos. The dishwasher works on the basis of uncooked water, cold water, that will now cook and heat and work for you on Shabbos. And if there's a knob on the dishwasher that you could turn it up, you could turn it down, you could use an eco setting, you could use a special, then that should be a problem of shehir. Just like you're not allowed to leave uncooked food on something with a knob that you can turn up, then you shouldn't be allowed to do this. This is an uncovered flame. This is not like a platter. This is or something with a covering over it. This is a regular. Okay, it's not an open flame inside the dishwasher, but it's a heating element which is not. You can't cover that in an unusual way. If you think about the things we use, like a blech or like aluminum foil, you can't do that to the inside of your dishwasher. And therefore, there is a real problem of shehir. Are you going to say, well, maybe it's okay if you cover the knobs? Well, we don't usually paskin like that. Rabbi Aaron Kotler has a psak on Shabbos that if you've got food on an open flame, but you cover the knobs, then that's okay. Very few people paskin like that. They paskin you have to cover the flame, not just the knobs. Maybe the flame and the knobs. But if you've got a knob on your dishwasher that can change the setting, then that could be a problem shehir anyway. Maybe if you take the knob off completely, or if you have an ancient dinosaur of a dishwasher that doesn't have any kind of setting changes, then maybe that will be okay. But then it'll be noisy. Very good. Excellent. So your dinosaur dishwasher won't help you. It'll help with this and it won't help with that. Yes, sir. Heating the water is a problem. Yes, correct. So anyway, but if it's on a timer, so then that's a grommer. The problem is shehir is not okay, even if it's a grommer. So let's leave it there. Next week we're getting into the hearing aid issue, which is a different kind of issue. We need to look at hearing aids generally, how they work, what the issues are, and charging them, as we said. And that will be the end of this series. Thank you.